Welcome everyone to this week in Svelte episode 82. I'm Paulo. I will be your host for today, and thank you for showing up despite being early. And I'd say let's jump right into it. We definitely didn't have any big news last Friday, right? Last Saturday. So let's jump right into it. We can see what changed in Svelte 5 next to 17. And let's take a look. So obviously, a lot of work around migration task. I wonder why. Add migration task for impossible to migrate slots. We read about more about the left. Bailout if slot name changes and slot assigned to variable. So these are mainly this was mainly about ironing out the migration script. I don't know if you've used the migration script, but to be fair, I have to be I used it at work, and to be fair, it did a pretty good job of migrating our code base. Obviously, there's still a bit of work to be done manually, but overall, I migrated basically more than 100 components repo in one evening, basically. Migrate reactive statement with inner block, migrating rest props type includes props types, migrated snippets shadowing prop and let directive removal, compiler diagnostic no longer extends error. This is just something internal. This was also interesting, reset element in render to prevent runtime error. Was pretty fun. We can see avoid chromium issue with dispatching blur on event removal. This browser specific bug are very, very annoying. Breaking state mutation inside the template are no longer allowed. I think we already talked about this a bit in the past, but basically, I want to show you. And this is a bit of a spoiler about something in the future, but basically what's not, and this is also a bit of a spoiler for for something later. What's not allowed is something like this. So let's say that we have state here, there's a state like this. So we are in run mode, and let's say that I have, I don't know, if condition like this, and this is true. I don't know. Now, if I have this function condition, inside this function technically is free real estate, in the sense that I can return true in the end, and that's it. But I can also do something else. I can do name is equal puppet, and this was allowed before, and it's not allowed now. Now, this may seem like a weird thing to do, why I can't mutate my state, but the thing is, inside the template, these are basically effects. So mutating state inside an effect is never a good idea. And what this basically caught a lot of people off guard, specifically when dealing with arrays. So let's say that I have 0, 4, 2, right? An array like this. And let's say that I want to render this array in an each. So I can do each r as item, and I want to render my item, right? Like this. This is simple, but then I notice, these are out of order. So it's more of a quirk of JavaScript than Svelte. But one thing that you might think to do is do .sort, and this is an error. This was caught a lot of people off guard, because here you are reading array and you are writing array. and this causes an infinite loop. So you can fix this by using toSorted. So this is fine, but like this error was specifically added for this situation. But in general, it's never a good idea to to mutate state inside the template. And here it is. Svelte 5 is available. I mean, you probably already know, but last Saturday we actually released Svelte 5.0.0 officially. You can use it now, run the migration script, and it's pretty cool. We immediately also released 5.0.1 for some improvement in the migration script. Specifically now, if you are using JSDoc and you want to, let's go back to the playground. If you are using JSDoc to document your component, specifically your props, export let props, let's say that you are doing something like this, and you do at type, I don't know, string, and then you can have, did my screen just crashed? Sorry. Okay. So if you do something like this, at type string, and then you can even add a comment after that, like, I don't know, this is the name. Like previously, we were like just extrapolating the string value and put it in a normal type right before the props. But now we're actually creating a typedef object with a property string, so that like, oh, it's actually not parting the comment now that I think about it. But yeah, it's pretty, like, you can actually do something like this. This is the name, and it will migrate to also add the comment there, which I think is pretty nice. Like it reads better and it's a better migration. Let's actually keep this thing open. Don't blank CSS on migration error. Basically, like, since we are not migrating CSS yet, because there's basically nothing to migrate, we are actually open. We have a PR open to migrate the small bit that you need to change about CSS. But since we are not migrating CSS, and you could use a preprocessor to handle CSS, that could lead to problems. And so we basically blank out the CSS to not create problems, and then we re-add the CSS again. But this was causing problem because if the migration throws, the CSS was blanked out, and instead it should not. Transitions events are dispatched without the current reaction. This is basically like when you can listen to a transition event when it's executed in or out, and those events were executed in the context of like it was synchronous, so it was executed with an effect active, which is wrong. Web view preload tag can be any string. Better children snippet default slot interop. So this is another thing. Like if you are migrating to Svelte 4, there is a snippet slot interoperation that now is made better. Mark has selector with multiple preceding selector is used. Like, yeah, okay. So this basically there was a small problem with the has selector specifically. Add more robust check for element prototype. More accurately detect derived migration opportunity, so it's even better. Debug does not work with proxy states, So now it's actually working. So if you use proxied state with debug, it will actually constantly debug. Do not add JSDoc if no types found. So it's always about the migration script. If you are not using JSDoc at all, it will not add anything. Show file name information for legacy recursive reactive block. So this is something like, this is just a warning, but basically, let's say that you had a component like this. Let count is equal to 0 and count plus equal 1. And if you show count now, as you can see, like, this is not an infinite loop. And we talked about a bit about this before, but basically, like, this is not an infinite loop in Svelte 4. And the reason because it's not an infinite loop is because these only run one per tick. So count update, and the fact that you are updating count does not re-trigger another count plus 1. So it stops at the first thing. In Svelte 5, this is not the case with effect. So this, if we just convert this to an effect, it will be an infinite loop. But if you're using the migration script, it will actually wrap this into a run. This run function you can import from Svelte Legacy, so don't use it for your personal gains. And this behaves the same, as you can see. But as you can see, like this, if you migrate to effect, this will introduce an infinite loop. So we print a legacy recursive reactive block. But before, this was not giving you any information about where does this problem happen. So if you just execute your code base, you might not know where this happened. So we added the name of the file so that you can at least get a sense of where looking to fix this thing. Ensure has selector followed by other selection match, like has it's kind of a weird CSS property, and it's creating a bit of a problem. Don't print errors on migration errors. This is something like, if you were migrating before this version, you will get an error printed to the console, and then, okay, a migration task has been added to this file. So the two things were kind of separate, and like you might like don't know, like, is the migration actually happened? Is it was blocked? So this will actually just print for errors that are not expected. Prevent spread attributes from overriding class directive. This was something that was kind of fixed before, but not for spread. Migrate TS with infer type comments. This was a small problem in the migration script, where if you were using TypeScript and also had a comment on the property, the comment was like moved without the actual comment, like without the comment tag in the beginning. So it was creating basically wrong. It was basically creating a wrong, like a non-runnable code, which is bad. Export mount option as the mount option type. Allow usage of get context within derived runes. This is pretty interesting. Because I don't even guess, like, I don't know how they did it, because in theory, get context needs to be called during component initialization. I want to take a look at the PR, because get context needs to be called during component initialization, and derived are only called lazily when they are actually used. So that's pretty interesting. Internally wrap, store, and subscribe in untrack. Allow binding to const with spread in legacy mode. This is like such weird edge cases, because like in legacy mode, if you were doing something like these, like this will not work. Only if you were spreading. If you were using these, like it would work anyway. So that's pretty weird. Um, Traverse children when checking matches for has. Again, has creating a bunch of problems, but it's fine. Improve consistency for transition. Enable bound store props in rune mode component. Ensure each block reference to import are handled correctly. So if you were importing something, uh, it doesn't need to be like to get, like it's not a signal. So ensures Svelte map reactivity persists through derives. Ensures snippet after empty text correctly hydrate. This is also another fun one. Basically, if you were rendering a snippet next to an empty space, an empty string, it will create a problem. This was also a problem adding, like if you were using export let in your component together with $$ props, it was creating invalid code for this. We're adding this. Prevent var name clashing for delegated events without parameters. This is also pretty interesting. Like I love when people start doing this because if you take a look at the issue here, like he's specifically started to break things. And if you did something like this before this fix, this was actually creating a problem in the sense that the it was logging the event even if like it was not the event because it's compiled like this. So this underscore was like that. And also if you did something like this, it will actually error out because now there are two uh, underscore variable. So yeah, but now it's fixed. So don't try. Don't try this at all. Um, yep. Okay, that's it. Let's see if we have some SvelteKit release, and we do have. Use absolute links in JS doc comments, which is nice. Include importer and illegal import error message. Nice. So basically, if you try to import from a server, it will also tell you which file it is. Don't try reading asset directly that aren't present. Interesting too. Decode non-Latin character when previewing pre-rendered pages. Is always fun. Like this very weird edge case always. Better message when a result is returned from an action. Okay. Docs update URLs for the new Svelte.dev site. Sorry for the yawn. Update URL for the new Svelte.dev site, and these actually like nicely lead to the next topic. I mean the next couple of topics actually. So we will talk about the new Svelte.dev website after that, but before I want to give you a small announcement because it's also Svelte Hack Runes Edition 2024. You can actually participate in a new hackathon. Do it. I think it's one of the best experience ever. It's fun. You have a lot of time. Like it will finish in January, I think. So there are a lot of prizes too. So like you can win up to €3,000, which is nice. And there are three categories. Wiz Bangery Wizard, which as usual is just like the best thing, the most impressive thing that you can do with Svelte and runes. So last hackathon, the Snuffy, which is one of our community members, won the Witzbangery Wizard by making a remake of Wolfenstein in Svelte, completely with the DOM. Like it's absolutely crazy. We have a rune ritualist, which is like this category is for npm and JSR packages that uses runes. So if you create an npm packages that take full advantage of runes, submit it because like you can win the hackathon. And I'm very excited to see which libraries will actually cut the the price here. And this is also very, very interesting. It's Migration Magician. Um, if you know about a project that uses Svelte, it doesn't need to be your own project. You can open a PR to a popular website that uses Svelte to convert it to migrate to runes, and that will count in this category. So, like, go around the world, find Svelte project, convert them to rune, and um, you can win some pretty nice price. Here are the rules. I mean, there are a bunch of rules. I'm not gonna bother you with these rules. Uh, yeah, who can't enter? Obviously, as organizers, we can't actually organize. We can't actually participate in the hackathon. And I mean, I just find it fair. Family members can't participate either, because otherwise, my wife, which doesn't know anything about Svelte, could, in theory, just win the hackathon, like totally in a legit way. But luckily, like actually, she can't. um, there is one small thing that's like, considering that the money for the hackathon comes from the Open Collective. So Svelte has is part of the Open Collective and has some fund in there. You need to be inside a country that can accept payment from Open Collective. If you want to participate, even if you are in countries that are not part, like that can't receive um, payment from Open Collective, um, you can actually choose to participate anyway and donate to a charity of your choice. So this was Sveltalk. Also, by the way, this was done by Willow and Brady, and look at this. It's absolutely amazing. Like, this website is so cool. Um, it's like they did a terrible, like, not terrible, sorry. I'm not a native English, but not terrible, but terrific job with this. So yeah, also look at this. I love the fact that the rune even follows you when you are below the fold. It's very fun. Okay, so now let's talk about the other. Um, that glowing rock is in Trelt. I am pretty sure that it is. I can ask you, like, Brady, if you are in the. I think Brady made it, and if you are in the chat, please let us know. I think it's Trelt. So let's talk about the other pretty exciting news, which is the new website. So Svelte.dev has a new website with a pretty controversial, but in my opinion, very cool web font. Like, a lot of people are not liking it, and I think we also have a PR open to allow you to change the font if you really don't like it. But I think, like, we discussed a lot about this thing, and I think, like, it's like, if you want to read a serif font is the best thing that you can do. And there's also a very clear, like, divisions between these and the code that runs. So yeah, I think it's pretty interesting. And as you can see, like, this new website, like, it's pretty cool. We have a lot of stuff. This is a video from Fireship, I think. This is the Svelte Origin documentary, and this is our community. Like, this can be you next time that we do the Svelte Summit in person. So yeah, it's pretty cool. Like, a bunch of photos of member of the community, and this is the whole community, and you effectively are Svelte. We also have all our contributors. Pretty cool. So yeah, And as you can see, like win prize, Svelte Hack 2024. So why we have a new website? As you can see, like the most important bit, in my opinion, is this. Like before, Svelte and SvelteKit had two very similar website, but in two different domains. So you couldn't search for Svelte stuff inside SvelteKit stuff, and the opposite is also true. And since the two are so integrated together, it was difficult for newcomers to like search for stuff and like have all the information that they need to get started in the same place. Now you can actually have the Svelte doc here and the SvelteKit docs here, and you can search for both. So if you search, I don't know, actions, you will actually get like SvelteKit actions, but also form actions, but also I think you actually get Svelte, template syntax, use, like stuff like that. So you have one single source where you can search for both documentations. Obviously, this is also specifically talking about Svelte 5. So you can see if we go to the Svelte docs, you can see the state rune and stuff like that. And you can also see like something like classes that were reactive before and now they are not. And this small bit that shows you how it was and how it is now. So like this will guide you through the whole journey to learn Svelte if you are a beginner, but also if you need to learn Svelte 5. As usual, the tutorial is also being updated. One good thing about the tutorial now is that before we were using web containers both for the Svelte tutorial and for the SvelteKit tutorial. But the Svelte tutorial actually doesn't need it, web containers. And since web containers like are particularly finicky, like in the sense that it take a bit more to load, but also like for example doesn't work on iOS. So if you want to learn Svelte while on the phone, you can actually do it now because this is actually using um, a browser version of Rollup to bundle your code here, and you can like fiddle around with it. And obviously, the moment you go to SvelteKit, which is for example, here now you go to SvelteKit, and now you are booting the web container, writing virtual file and stuff like that. So now this is the full stack. Um, is the full stack tutorial that you are used to see. So as usual, pretty cool stuff. The blog is obviously the blog. The biggest is now that Svelte 5 is alive, and the REPL has been reworked. Like it's a much cooler thing, and obviously, like it's inspired by the preview REPL that we had, so you can actually migrate your component to Svelte 5. This is telling you if it's in rune mode or not. So you can say, for example, $state, and this will tell you that you are in rune mode. And nice thing about the button is that now you also can access all the examples directly here. So I don't know, you want to render props, this will show you how you can render a children and stuff like that. So it's pretty cool. Like if you want, you can just go over here and look at all the examples from the tutorial in the playground. And another nice thing, in my opinion, that it's one thing that I kind of loved but also hate about the Svelte 5 preview is the fact that I can just type something here, something very quickly, and if I want to share this with someone, I don't need to save it in my account. And you can do this too now. So if you focus out of the code, you can see that now the code has been put up there. And so I can quickly modify something, copy the URL, and send it to you. But if I want, I can also save it. Obviously, I need to log in if I want to actually save. But if I want, I can save it, and then I get a stable link that I can modify and like always be updated, because like this actually is the best of both worlds, because I can also change something else here and I still get the change here. And I think this is pretty cool. Let's see, I think there are some the next button on the tutorial doesn't work. The next the link to the next item is hidden by the Svelte banner. Now I closed the Svelte, so I can't. Okay, I get what you're saying. Okay, I think we can fix this. I will take a note. Thank you for reporting. We also got another announcement, but we will talk about that probably next week, because what I want to do now is going over a specific page of the doc, and which is the Svelte 5 migration guide. I think like it's important, so let's go over the migration guide so that we can see what it takes to use the migration script to migrate a component to Svelte 5, and you can actually do it because we want you to on Svelte 5. So version 5 comes with an overall syntax. You don't have to migrate, blah, 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 blah. So first thing, obviously, like the let count equals 0 now needs to be migrated using state. You will most likely never do this because the migration script is actually doing it for you. But yeah, if you want to migrate by hand, and by the way, you can also migrate with a command in the Svelte, like with in VS Code. So in VS Code, if you type a command, you can type migrate this component to Svelte 5 syntax, and it will actually apply the migration to that specific file. This, like the label statement, is actually migrated to either derived or effect. So for normal derived value, like double, for example, you can just do this, derived count times 2. And this is the same as the label statement. Sometimes, like if it needs a bit of logic, for example, this can't be run inside a derived, obviously, because derived is for derived state. But if you want to run this like is a good change with effect. And another very interesting bit, which are kind of hidden for the moment, but you see, like, you also get why we did this. So why this change? Because a lot of people were scared, like, oh, why you did this? So we can actually see, like, let being implicitly reactive at the top level worked great, but it meant that reactivity was constrained to the top level. So let declaration anywhere else was not reactive. And so this basically meant that like Svelte was not really composable in any way. By using this, like it's a bit more overhead writing the component, but you can use this in everywhere. So derived an effect why we did this. This was a grid shorthand, but it doesn't work in TypeScript, for example, in TypeScript file, or in JavaScript file, for what is worth it. Also, it was conflating two things into the same. Like, do you want to create a derivation or a side effect? So it was conflating those two things into the same thing. With derived an effect, you have a bit more upfront decision, but in the future, like you will have an easier time. And also, spoiler alert, and we will talk about this in a future episode, 90% of the time you want a derived effect should be considered a hack. So don't overuse effects. There were also a lot of gotchas, like only updated directly before rendering, only run one per tick, as we said. Dependencies were determined through static analysis, which means that if you were like passing stuff into a function, you had no dependency in that function. Statements were ordered using static analysis that could lead to the order like into a wrong result. So yeah, it wasn't TypeScript friendly, obviously, because you couldn't type stuff, for example. Export let now become props. So before you had a series of export let, now you have one single $sign props with stuff like this. This is much easier to type, is much concise, like in the sense that like it's easier probably to literally have less stuff to type, but this also kind of help because you now have all the information about the props in a single place. Before, you could scatter export let all over your component file, and this means that if you then come back to the file and want to see the props, for example, you might be confused and then discover that there was a prop below the fold, for example. So this is much easier, and it's also much easier to deal with REST props, for example, because before there was no way to have all the rest of the props, so we had to have a magic $sign REST props prop that was there, and now it's actually just JavaScript. Pretty cool. So events now lose the colon, and they are also just properties. So this means that they are spreadable. That's the best thing about events. So before, there was no way to list them, for example, to expose every event from the input, for example. You would literally need to do on colon for all the events that you want. And now you can just like spread the REST props and everything come into place. And this also meant that when you create like an event, you had to do something like create event dispatcher and like expose, like create an event with create event dispatcher. This was done initially because like Svelte, like web component seems to be the future. But it's much easier to just have a function as a prop and call a function. I guess a lot of people were already doing this, and so yeah, I guess like it's much better now. Before, you could bubble an event with just doing on click, and now it's a bit more boilerplatey, but again, like you gain about readability, so you can just accept a prop. And again, you can also spread all the events. Event modifiers were removed. A lot of people, I think, were kind of upset about this, but to be fair, like it was never, I actually almost never used this kind of stuff. It's nice when quickly prototyping, but yeah, at the end of the day, you can just create some function like this and like apply it like this if you really want to have something. But it's probably much easier to just get the event and do prevent default, and it's also much easier to reason about it. Obviously, this means that before you could have multiple click listeners because they were just added, and now it's not really possible. But again, like this is very error prone, because let's say that you are changing something in one event listener and needs to be changed in the other. You might not realize that there is another on click event listener. So it's much easier to just do this and like write the logic here and here. So yeah. This is also another big change, and honestly, like it's chef keys. So before we were using slot, again inspired by web components, um, but it was kind of a pain to work, specifically because sometimes you need to pass something up from the child to the parent. So we had this weird let colon stuff, but this was not very clear about which scope actually have access to that variable. It was like not really like it was difficult to reason, especially for beginners. You get used to it, but like it was very difficult. But now we actually have just snippet. So a snippet is just a prop, and it's basically you can think of as a function that return a markup, and you can just pass it in, and you can use render, and you render just like a function, so you can pass something in, and by default, like in this case, you can have multiple, so this is easier. Like, yeah, you could use slot name header, but like again, it's much more clearer now. And if you want to pass data, you can just pass a function. And the nice thing is that by default, everything inside a component will be passed as the children slot, a snippet. If you need something back, you need to create a named snippet, named children. But this also means that you can have multiple, like they are very much more versatile, because like if you pass these, this also gets passed as a prop, but you can also define these outside and pass it literally as a prop. So you can pass the same snippet to multiple components, for example. You can just render it in place multiple times. Like slots are so much like snippets are so much better. But so this probably was the main like changes that you have to make. Again, you can use npx sv migrate svelte 5, and this will do a bunch of stuff for you. So it will bump your dependencies, it will migrate to rooms, everything. It will migrate event attributes, it will migrate slots, it will migrate the snippets, and even components creation and stuff like that. So and again, if you have the VS Code extension, you can just run the command migrate component to Svelte 5 syntax, or you can try out in the playground. So even if you want, like you have a component that you want to migrate, just go to the playground, paste it in, and click migrate, and it's done. Like you get like the migrated stuff. So if you want to play around with it, it's pretty nice. So this was also something that was exported, like run. As I've said, we talked about this before. Is not exactly the same as effect, but run basically does multiple things. One, it prevents you from infinite looping. Two, it's also run on the server, because effect is only run on the client. So since the label was also run on the server, run actually does this. Like it runs once on the server, and then it runs on the client with use effect, with effect, not use effect. So again, this is something from Svelte Legacy. You shouldn't use it in your project after the migration. Like you can migrate to it, and then you should try to find a way to actually do it for real. From Svelte Legacy, we're also exporting the event modifiers, which are basically a series of functions that just do basically what the event modifier did. Again, this is a patch, like a band-aid solution. You shouldn't use it. This is just something that we use when we migrate your code, because we can't really touch it enough to actually add the event prevent default and stuff like that. So there are stuff that are not auto migrated, like the create event dispatcher or before and after update, but you will see a bunch of migration task comment in your in your code base, and you can just go over them and like manually migrate the stuff that it needs to be migrated. Let's see what other changes. Components are no longer classes. So these are sort of breaking changes that there are between Svelte 4 and Svelte 5. Before, you could just mount a new component like this. Now you actually need to use the mount function from Svelte itself. Doesn't change much. You can do this. You can also, like, if you want to pass some prop down, you can actually use state directly. So you can pass the prop, you mount the component by passing the props, and then you can migrate, like you can change the props like this. Obviously, this needs to be inside a .svelte.js or a .svelte.ts file. But yeah, you can just do this and be like the component will actually update. Destroy is actually substituted by unmount. And if you really can't migrate, you can use this create class component, which basically wrap all of this for you. Like, it create a class that actually use this stuff under the hood. Again, this is kind of like performance, I don't want to say heavy, because it's not really heavy, but it will be better. Like, if you can migrate to mount, it's much better. Server API changed. So before, you could do up.render to get a server-side rendered component, like the HTML of the component. Now you can do the same with the render function. So it's basically the same, and this will return the HTML and the head, which are both strings. The typing of the component changed. So before, component was a class, so you could actually do something like this: component, blah, blah, blah. So this also means that you could create something like this. Now you actually need to type like type of component instead, because components now are functions. So you need to type it, like if you want to bind to this, you actually need to do like a return type of component in this case. Bind these no longer return a class instance, obviously, but it return the function itself. So yeah. Also, another stuff that changed is white space handling. So before, Svelte, if you had multiple white space between elements and between components, were actually rendering all those white space. So if you had something like 2 spaces, you will get 2 spaces into the HTML. This is rarely wanted, because obviously, like sorry, I need to plug my computer in. Is rarely what you want, because like white space are very dependent. Like when you write your code, you are actually writing a bunch of white space that you probably, again, I don't know why my screen continue crashing. Okay, so now white space between nodes is collapsed to one white space. So if you have multiple white space, it's collapsed into one. White space at the start and the end of a tag is removed completely. So if you have like B space 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 my stuff space 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 B, you will just have my stuff. And certain exception apply, like white space is kept inside pre-tags, because if you want a pre-tags, you probably want white space. If you want, you can disable white space trimming by setting preserve white space inside the Svelte options. Now, Svelte 5 uses proxies, so if you want, and also resize observer, so it kind of require a modern browser to work with JavaScript. As usual, like if you write your components, and by modern means not Internet Explorer, but if you needs to build for Internet Explorer, you can just build with progressive enhancement in mind. If you want, there is also a legacy compiler option, which generate a bulkier but IE friendly code. Oh, sorry. There was, but now there's not. And it's time to say goodbye to our friend come on, Internet Explorer. There was some changing to the compiler option too. So, for example, um, so CSS option, now it can't be either false or true and or none. So I can't remember what's the. I think it's only externalized and injected now. Legacy option was repurposed. Hydratable option has been removed. So Svelte components are always hydratable. Enable source map has been removed, and source map are always generated. The tag option was removed. So if you now need to create a custom element with Svelte, you need to use Svelte option custom element tag name inside the component. Loop guard timeout, format, Svelte path, error mode, and vars report were removed. Now, children is obviously reserved, because we told, like as I told you, this is created automatically for you, so you can't have a prop called children. This is also this is a nice thing, but this was before considered an HTML element, an invalid one, but an HTML element indeed. And now it's actually considered a component. So if you have something like item, you can do item.component without capitalizing the letter. There are some breaking change in run mode. For example, binding to components export are not allowed. So you cannot bind these to a constant variable that you are exposing from the component. It will actually fail in a graceful manner if you try to do it will tell you why it failed. Binding need to explicitly define using bindable. So before, every prop was bindable. You could bind to every props. Now you need to be a bit more explicit, and you have to say, okay, this is actually something that I will write on. And I think this is fair, because at the end of the day, if you know that you will write to something, it's fine it's a win-win situation for you and whoever uses your component. Access source option is ignored. So before, if you had the accessor option, you could basically access the prop on the instance itself. Now it's ignored, but if you want, you can actually export stuff from the component. So if you get a prop and you export it from the component, that will create an accessor for you. Immutable option is ignored, so there's no more immutable, because it doesn't make sense really, because immutable was basically to allow you to tell Svelte, okay, I will always reassign this object as a whole. I will never assign a property of the object, and this allowed Svelte to be more smart about the checks. But now you can just use state and state.frozen, state.row to actually make it work. Classes are no longer auto-reactive. So before, if you do something like this was actually reactive. Now they are not auto-reactive, but you can make reactive a field by creating a state property on it. Svelte component is no longer necessary. So before, Svelte component was necessary because you had to the code to make so that if you reassign a variable, it will actually unmount the old component and mount the new component, was very heavy. So that's why we had Svelte component. But with runtime fine-grained reactivity, that's not a thing anymore. So you can just do thing and make it work. Touch and wheel event are passive by default. A passive event means that you can't call event prevent default, and the browser will actually optimize those. So these events here are passive by default, and it's probably fair because you don't want to prevent the on wheel. You just want to listen to where it's wheeling, probably, but yeah. Attribute prop syntax is stricter. So before you could do something like this, which I don't know if anybody actually did it because it's absolute madness, but basically, like by this means like this was valid, like without quote marks. So now instead, if you want to concatenate stuff, you need to use the quote marks around. If this is another thing, like before, if you had something like this, answer quote mark 42, this was actually passed in as a number by Svelte. I mean, this is kind of silly, but it was usual in the beginning because people were using the HTML language server to like properly visualize Svelte component and syntaxize Svelte component. Now it's not needed anymore, and it's just a foot gun. So in Svelte 6, this will cause the value to be converted to string. So HTML requires a bit of a stricter structure. Okay, I will answer these questions. So now, basically, you have to have a T-body, for example, between table and tr, because this is technically invalid component. The browser will auto-insert it for you, but Svelte is now enforcing that you write proper HTML. At const assignment validation, it's stricter now. Is and where are now scoped. So if you write this, I think it also has a not. So before they were just free real estate, and now it's actually scoped. The CSS hash position is no longer deterministic. Before, the CSS hash was always the last one. Now is not. But it's fine because it's only a breaking if you have very weird selector like class ends with Svelte stuff. Now scope CSS use where. Before it was literally adding an extra class, but that added specificity. So now with where it's actually the same specificity, but obviously this is a breaking change. Warning and error codes have been renamed. So before it was with I don't know how it's called. Now it's an underscore. Reduced number of namespaces. Before there was a lot, I think. Now like foraying is being removed basically. And before update and after update are deprecated, and you can just use effect.pre and effect instead. Content editable changed. So yeah, the bindings takes full control over the content immediately, and it should only be updated through it. On event name attributes no longer accept string value. So if you do on click, you can't pass a string. This is technically valid HTML, but it's a foot gun, and we are actually using them properly. So don't do it, please. Null and undefined become empty string. So if you are rendering null or undefined, now before it was rendering literally null and literally undefined. Now it's rendering an empty string. Bind files values can only be null, undefined, or file list for two bindings. Binding now react to form resets. So if you are resetting a form, you can actually get the value inside the bind. Previously, Svelte compiler was re-exporting Walk, but it's just exporting from ES3 Walker, so you can just export that. Content inside Svelte option is forbidden, so you can't have something inside Svelte option. I don't know why you would, but that's it. Slot element in declarative shadow roots are preserved. So if you had a declarative shadow root, so before slots were the Svelte version of slot, now they're just the slot from the web containers. Svelte element tag must be an expression. So before you could do something like d is equal div, but that's really no reason to do this because you could just write div. So it needs to be an expression. You could do this if you really want, but again, I don't see the reason for it. Mount play transition by default. So when you mount a component, a transition is actually played. Before it was not. EMG source and HTML iteration mismatch are not repaired. So if the value of the source or of the HTML changes from the server to the client, it will not be repaired. So it will stay like the one inside the server. But if you can get around this by using a variable and setting some stuff inside effect. Iteration works slightly different. On event attributes are delegated. So when you do on click, there's actually one single event listener at the top of your page that listens to all the clicks and determine which handler to run. This means that it's required, like you can't block the event in the middle. If you do it outside of Svelte control, that will cause problems. Style props uses a different element. So before it was using a div, but now since Svelte 4.5 it's stricter, it's using this custom element Svelte CSS wrapper. So if you were targeting that div for some reason, now you need to target this. There was some question, which is, will there be a shorter video of these changes uploaded? I mean, this will be uploaded, this video. I don't know if you can make it shorter. I was already pretty quick to go through this, but you can read it yourself if you want, and you can always rewatch these, maybe even at 1.5. That accessor stuff, how do I type it correctly? By type it mean like how do Svelte knows what's is exported? That is already typed by Svelte, by the Svelte language server. So you're good to go. And I think that's it, guys. So that was pretty fun. And again, as usual, 1 hour passed. So thank you for joining. I hope you learned something, and I hope it was interesting for you. And I'll catch with you next week. Bye.